American Writers Festival. Y'all are respectable in here. Let's wake up. Hello. I am Nikesha Elise Williams, the author of the historical fiction novel, The Seven Daughters of Dupree, and the producer and host of Black and Published Podcast. And we are here for my very first live podcast ever, debuting at the American Writers Festival in Chicago, the city that raised me, so that is only right. I have 3 guests today, and our first guest is Jabari Asim, who is an author of 6 books for adults and 9 books for children. He's also a journalist, cultural critic, and distinguished professor of creative writing at Emerson College. Next to him, we have Dr. Deborah D. Douglas. Did I give you a doctor by accident? I'm sorry. But Deborah D. Douglas is the author of the U.S. Civil Rights Trail, a traveler's guide to the people, places, and events that made the movement. It's the first ever travel guide to follow the official Civil Rights Trail in the South. Douglas is also the director of the Midwest Solutions Journalism Hub at Northwestern University and is a founding co-editor-in-chief of The Emancipator, an award-winning digital platform that reimagines early abolitionist newspapers. And finally, we have Lonnae O'Neal, who is an award-winning journalist and author of I'm Every Woman, Remixed Stories of Marriage, Motherhood, and Work. And her latest book is Bib Country, Unearthing My Family Secrets of Land, Legacy, and Lettuce. Welcome, everyone. All right, so if anybody's ever listened to Black and Published, then you know the first question. It is, when did you know that you were a writer? And we'll start with Jabari.
Oh, shoot. Wait, I can't curse, can I? Shoot.
On my podcast you can, but I don't know what the rules are for the festival, so let's keep it clean.
Sorry. I don't know. I think I was in college, and I said I was a writer, and then I had some pivotal experiences with a particular professor who mentored me, who actually kind of diplomatically suggested that maybe I wasn't, and that I needed to do some reading first. So it was a process of kind of like doing the work, doing it poorly, and then slowly, incrementally getting better and getting to the point where people were like, maybe you could do something with this, right? And so I think at that point, I thought, maybe I am. Maybe I can comfortably call myself that now.
Yeah. Deborah?
For me, it was 8 years old, and it was an encounter in figuring out what I wanted my life's vocation to be. I like to read. I wanted to be glamorous. So I thought I would never be Diana Ross glamorous, but I could be TV anchor woman glamorous. And so I read everything I could read, the encyclopedias, periodicals, and really it was a lifelong journey from 8 years old till now that led me to the stage.
I don't know when I knew I was a writer. I just knew at some point I was wired different. Like I just thought about things different, and I had these things in me that I was dying to say, right? Like you, for me, it was watching Superman and seeing Lois Lane, and she had those little pillbox hats and the little pencil skirt. I wish it were deeper than that. I do, but that's what made me want to be a journalist. That and so when I filed my first story for the Washington Post, when I put my name on it as staff writer, it freaked me out so much I took it off. And I never sent in another story with my name on it. Come to find out, that's an old journalist convention, right? A byline is something that is given to you. You do not send it in with that. So I was aligned in that way. But yeah, so it was just a process. I just knew I had something in that had to come out.
It's funny, that's the last thing I always add to a story, and it's after I've proofed it and reread it, it's like, is this worthy of your name? And then it goes
Girl,
on.
it just freaked me out. It was
really?
Up there. I was like, oh, you are mocking me. I had this whole internal, so I just did.
So as you all mentioned, we are all sitting here on this stage, journalists as well as authors. Did you all choose journalism as a vocation because the path to becoming an author was nebulous? Like, how did you find your way?
It was a first step. That was a very legible path, right? And so I was a writer for the Washington Post. Actually started out news aide, delivering faxes, answering phones, and worked my way in and left the Post as a columnist. But it was a way to tell stories, and that's what we're really talking about, right? And from there, one of the stories that I wrote became my first book.
Yeah, I come from working class people, born on the west side of Chicago, started school in post-uprising Detroit, And so the idea of going into this nebulous world of publishing was something that, like you said, legibility, that's legible is a really great word. And so the idea that the paper comes to your house every day, you can sit, you can touch it, and you can interact with it, felt like a more plausible path for me.
Yeah, I started off kind of in denial, right? I said I will never be a journalist. That's not something I'm going to do. I'm a poet. I will only write poems. Right? And so I was fortunate. I was very young, and I got some poems published in a pretty prestigious journal. And the payment, as it often is, was 2 contributors' copies of the journal. And I was very proud and very happy to receive them. And then I kind of stumbled into a story. I wrote a story about a sculptor who had an exhibit in my town, and I took it to the weekly newspaper, and they paid me $35. So I kind of went, contributors' copies, $35. I did the math, right? And I said I'm going to do more of this, and that's actually how I got into journalism, because I wanted to get paid.
You couldn't take your contributor's copy to the phone bill, to the electric company.
Hey, I got poems in here, right? Keep the lights on. No.
We cannot be paid in books. So then, knowing all of your work leading up to building a byline, building a career as a journalist, when did you have an inkling that maybe there was more than the op-ed or the column or the reported feature, that there was actually a book inside of you that you wanted to dedicate extended time to? Start with Deborah.
Okay, I haven't really done a great job of listening to that voice. I feel like I have so many more books in me, and I just hope that I have enough time to get it all out. But I was presented with an opportunity to submit a proposal for my book, The U.S. Civil Rights Trail. It's the first ever travel guide to follow the official Civil Rights Trail in the South. Came out 5 years ago. This is a new edition that just came out this year. I was presented with the opportunity, and because of my body of work, because I have built many kinds of publications, so I revel in the process of just the publishing process. At the time, I was a visiting professor in Indiana, but also I was the founding managing editor of a publication called MLK 50, Justice Through Journalism, which focuses on poverty, power, and policy in Memphis. I have done lobbying work with a local congressman. I've worked with Rainbow Push. So just based on my body of work, I felt like I was the right person to write this book. And I thought I also could do some narrative repair in the course of writing this book by honoring my elders and making sure that they had a voice in this book. So I was going to bring my best reportorial self to this book, in addition to highlighting all of these places where history happened and pointing to all the institutions. But it gave me an opportunity to embrace the reporter side and to roll up on people like Diane Nash, who I stalked for 9 months to get an interview. To let them
True journalist right there.
to speak through the book in their own words in a way that we are not used to hearing them.
I love that phrase, narrative repair. That
Yes.
was beautiful.
Lonnae?
For me, I think I wrote my books when I couldn't do nothing else with the words, right? When the words I had and the stuff that was coming out overwhelmed the forum, right? And so I had to get a bigger container to put everything in. I had to go deeper, right? Because it's not, if you were choosing things, you might say, I choose to have a pleasant experience. I choose to be in a peaceful spirit. I would not choose for ancestors to stick their knee in your back, right? and rattle their chains and play their records till you just don't want to hear them anymore type thing. The words are just kind of coming out. And so luckily, what you can do with a book is get that container and break it down and make it accessible so that you can just get it out of your head. And that had been my experience with writing the books.
I think I kind of stumbled into my first book, which was nonfiction. It was a collection of essays by African-American men about justice and the criminal justice system. But I stumbled into it because I was just writing poetry and fiction and didn't have a real interest. I was working my day job. I was an editor at the Washington Post, but I had no interest really in doing nonfiction at that moment. But then the policemen who fired 41 times at Amadou Diallo, striking him 19 times, were acquitted. And a good friend of mine called me. I was at my desk, and he's very upset. He's like, "Can you believe those policemen were acquitted?" And I was like, "Of course they were acquitted. Why are you calling me? I'm at work. Go moan somewhere else." He was real upset. He hung up. Then my wife calls me. She goes, "Can you believe those policemen were acquitted?" I said, "Of course. Why people keep calling me about this, right?" And so she hung up. And then she called me back, and she said, "I'm watching the news." We have 4 sons. So I'm watching the news with your sons. They're making a connection between themselves and Amadou Diallo. What you going to do about it?
So you wrote a book?
I said, "I can't do anything about it. I'm just a nerdy writer sitting at this desk. What am I going to do?" And then when I hung up, I said, I know what I can do. I can write a book. And that's how the first book emerged.
That makes me want to add something.
Go for it.
In addition to the sort of, this torture, right, I got to get these words out of me, it was also Jabari and his wife that said, "You need to write a book." So,
They have a
That
way of
helped
going,
too.
"Deb, have you ever thought of, well, Deb, if you just organize this and that way, well, you need to think about," and then if I listen, it happens.
This is what happens when you're in community with other writers,
Yeah,
and then they
yeah,
force
I
you to
mean-
do other things.
That
I mean,
part.
I think I'm possibly more proud of being able to recognize other talent and other brilliance than I am of my own writing. And I'm privileged to know and to have worked with writers like Deborah and Lonnae. And I feel very validated by the books that they produced, because to me it was really obvious when I first read their writing. There's some brilliance here, and everybody needs to be exposed to it.
So let's talk about the process of book production. What was it like to make the transition from journalism to bookmaking with a focus on history, given especially what you said about narrative repair, recontextualizing certain arguments, reframing the lens and perspective of history that is often taught, and giving it a point of view from that of people who are systemically disenfranchised and often are not considered the victors, so to them doesn't go the pen?
Yeah. Well, there are a few things about this book. I spent a year wooing the editor in the process of turning in the proposal and waiting to hear if I actually won the contract.
You had to woo the editor, say more?
I didn't have to woo the editor, but I decided to woo the editor in my campaign to persuade them that I was the very best and the only person fit to write this particular book. And so I made it a point to develop a relationship with her and just to email or call her up every once in a while, maybe riff off the news, bring up topics and say, "I was thinking about this thing in this way for that reason." And one insight that I was bringing into the process early on was I wanted to reflect on the power dynamics in the mid-century civil rights movement between black men and black women. And I wanted to rebalance the scales in my narrative by making space for the stories of what those women helped to accomplish on our behalf. I did find out as I was moving through the process and interfacing with, luckily a lot of these people are still alive. They're dying out now, but they're still alive, that the women outlived the men. And so then I had to be able to be open-minded and to listen to myself, to rebalance in the other direction too, as I was working on this title.
So for me, I'll take that in twofold. I love the notion of narrative repair. It reminds me of something Jabari talked about, and I adopted for my own, which is narrative combat, right? And these dueling ideas. And so my most recent book, Bib Country, Unearthing My Family Secrets of Land, Legacy, and Lettuce. See, it's got me so traumatized, I got to read the subtitle. But that started as a story I wrote for ESPN The Undefeated, which was a platform devoted to race, sports, and culture. I had not been a sports reporter at the Washington Post. I was at the Washington Post for 24 years, and I left a columnist, but I was not a sports reporter, but I did race and culture, and it was a story about finding out through Facebook that my family, my grandmother was Susie Bibb, that they were descendants of enslavement, and that the enslavers had a wealth that was foundational to America, right? While my grandmother grew up hungry. And so I could not let that story go, right? And so that is like the impetus for it, sort of, and the feeling behind it. But each time you do a book, it's a custom job in terms of how you get there. So already having a story, that part was easier to me because I just broke it down into a series of essays and stories, and I just considered myself on deadline for each chapter. Now, they were deadlines I blew past a little bit, but it gave me at least a framework, you know, and so that gave me a way to organize it and think about doing the writing and the research.
Well, my most recent book is a novel called Yonder, and it takes place in 1852 among a group of enslaved people. And one of the things that I was interested in was filling in the gaps in the historical narrative. And I've always kind of been obsessed with Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia, which was the definitive text about black people, supposedly, for about 100 years. And in that, in those notes, he writes that black people are incapable of genuine romantic love, that we are motivated solely by animal attraction, animal instincts, right? And we all know that that is a lie, right? But I wanted to tell a story that kind of, actively engaged with that particular lie. So I wanted to write a story about how did love sustain itself amid conditions in which love was actually forbidden, right? And so, and to remind myself that, history is always alive, I placed photos of the three oldest photos that my family possesses of ancestors, and I put them in frames, and I put them on my writing desk. And each day before I would start, I would kind of speak to them and say, okay, are you ready? Let's begin, right? And we would kind of start the story that way. So history is very much an animating engine behind all of the writing that I do.
I love the idea that love lives within us at anywhere we are on the timeline, because it reminds me of Dinah Ramey Berry's book, The Price for Their Pound of Flesh, where she goes to the ledgers to look at how black people were valued during enslavement. And, she has these three categories that link to monetary value, but then she created a new definition called soul value. And it's the value that we inherently had within ourselves, and that we were always in a state of resistance and resilience and a state of love.
So here's the narrative reclamation, to your point, exact point. I have a ledger in here that values my fourth grade grandmother, who the enslavers called Old Keziah, at $300. And there came a point in my writing where I said, you know what, don't nobody black call their elders old anything. And so I called her Mama Keziah. And then the tears just poured out of me. And I wrote that for the first time since ever hearing tell of any such thing as a white bib, I hadn't lost my ancestors to enslavement. I had gained a big mama, a woman who I could name and claim me and call me free with every step she took on the Appalachian Trail, right? And so that reclamation, and just as you were talking about with those records, the book you start out writing at day one is not the one
that you publish.
Is not the
it's
one
not
that
the one you publish at all.
Right. It's
So
very dynamic.
With the work that you all do in telling your own stories about whether it's memoir, telling stories of our history, or writing for the repair of to like give your son something to look forward to, you are wrestling with not only your own personal stories, but also the stories that are told about our history in this country. How do you, because this is the question that I get, how do you protect yourself when you're wrestling with this history and trying to do something to correct what has been a long taught lie? Everybody's looking like, who's gonna start?
I just wanted to be ruthlessly accurate, so I started out writing a standard travel guide. I'm with a 50-year-old publisher, a part of the Hatchet book group, and so they have a formula, so a lot of my book existed on spreadsheets before I even hit the road. But then there was the actual story behind the story, and then when you connect with human beings to get to infuse their voices, then it turned into something else. And so I didn't really think I was writing a history book when I started this. I thought I was writing a travel book, but it's actually a history book.
That's how they trick you.
Yeah. But it's a really great on-ramp to some very in-depth stories. So There are small dispatches throughout the book, but they open up whole worlds. And I started to notice like how people and institutions and egos and personalities play with historical records. And so, I was looking at documentation and then talking to people who are actually in a place, in a space when something happened, like Bernard Lafayette, he became like an uncle to me. And Joanne Bland, one of the youngest marchers in the Selma to Montgomery March. But I was always going back to like really to the nth degree, validate exactly what happened and the choreography of how it happened, because I can see in some of the most credible records where things didn't quite line up exactly right. And it wasn't like, I didn't take it as a glitch. I'm like, somebody has something to gain by us believing this thing in this order. And I wanted to be a part of the solution and not the problem.
For me, I had this sort of fork in the road early on where I was looking for this woman that I talk about in a story of my father, who was a Chicago police officer and who worked under John Burge, and it killed him later. But and so I found this woman who he had shot, right? And I found her 40 years after. I had never gone looking for her, and I finally found her when I'm starting this book, and she had died 2 weeks before I found her. And I said to myself, I'm not going to interview any white people in this book, because she was a white woman. And that freed me up. And in freeing me up, I said, if I want to read, I'm going to tell this from a black lens. It is going to be entirely told from a black perspective. And there had been in the family reunion some white folks who were good white folks, and they tried to get close to me, and I kept them at arm's distance. And what I realized was, if I allowed myself to get close to them, then I would not write the way that I needed to write to tell the truth. That I would be trying to take care of them.
Yeah, because we're primed to write for the white gaze.
Right.
What does it mean to like flip that on his head and write from the black gaze?
And if they're taking care of themselves and I'm taking care of them, who's taking care of the descendants of the enslaved, right? And that was my job and my responsibility. And it freed me up to be, as you say, ruthless, no matter what it looked like. And so, I go in on colorism and Beware of Becky and, among other things, right?
All the things.
Well,
I mean, it's kind of funny, too.
I did make a decision that in this book, because I send people to actual businesses, so I get an opportunity to do what I journalistically call asset frame black communities, sending people to our communities on purpose to enjoy the joy and bounty of our communities, as opposed to interfacing with the problem of those communities. And so anywhere I could send anyone to a black-owned business in this book, that's what I did. So anytime you see a business, just assume that it's black-owned, unless I tell you that it's not a black-owned business, because that's the one way that I could pay tribute, and that's the way to connect people from the timeline into the present in order to invest in what this story represents.
And make it that lived history that you were talking about, living history, alive.
And it becomes part of a collective counter-narrative that black writers have to posit against this what Toni Morrison calls the master narrative, right?
Narrative.
And the master narrative is not dependent on race, it's dependent on powers. The people in power imposing a particular story among people who have less power. And so as writers, part of our mission is to counter that, is to provide a counter narrative.
So I'm about to jump in my 9-to-5 day job bag as a narrative strategist. So part of the work that I do is around narrative strategies of small grassroots organization, with the belief that a narrative is a collection of stories with similar themes and ideas that have permeated over time. And so the stories that we tell are the first layer. We use like a model called waves. So the waves that you see lapping up on the beach on the sand are that first layer of stories. And as you go deeper into the ocean or Lake Michigan, that is where the deepest narratives lie that have existed for a generation or more and take a generation or more to change. And so the belief is that if you can change the narrative about anything, you can change policy. This is what most organizations are working to do. And part of what the work you're doing as writers, as armchair historians, so to speak, because we're journalists, but we're not historians, is working to change the narrative at deeper and deeper levels. Given that you all, and myself included, write about these difficult subjects, do you find it even more difficult now to tell these stories, given the current political climate and the active regression and retrenchment of equality, equity, and basic human and civil rights? I'm gonna start with Deborah, since she wrote the book on civil rights.
I mean, I have to be honest, like just right now at this moment, I feel a little bit paralyzed because I always try to find a point of entry to offer some hope in the next thing that I offer. And even when things are really bad, my message to myself and to other people is that, you know, we just got to play the long game, and things change over time. Because something terrible happens every 15 minutes in this country now, I'm trying to figure out like a new way to like self-soothe myself, to give myself the energy and the passion and the messaging, because you never stop telling your story. You're always writing the book when you're not writing the book. But I just have to remember that it will not always be like this. And, you know, I was thinking this morning, I'm like, well, the book is also a roadmap to how to strategize and how to build community, and maybe we need to, like, you know, dig deep into what these people did at that time to get some breadcrumbs on how to move forward. But it's hard right now. I'm a little bit sad.
It's interesting. I was having a conversation the other day, and I said it is an interesting thing to contract for a book in 2021. Yeah. And publish it in 2025, because those are two different versions of America, right? And what it led me to understand deeply is that black people are seasonal to everybody else but other black people. Yes. And once you sort of recognize that, if you just stick to us, because we're always in fashion, we're always in style, we're always in season to me, right? Our stories are timeless, they're universal, they're everlasting, and they're the oldest stories in human history, right? I was talking to somebody talking about Ethiopia, and I was like, hey, that's where we started, like human beings. So when I remember that and just, you know, gravitate back towards that, that's my true north. Yes. Right? That allows me to say the nature of black work is always long and over time and generations, and planting seeds for trees you won't sit under, and all of that kind of stuff. And that we have been here before, and what you were just saying, looking to guides like yours for the strategies. How do we, you know, we always bring creativity to everything. We're always thinking. There's a gallery in the Blacksonian, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I don't think the administration calls it the Blacksonian, but we do. You don't think so? Yeah, and they've got a gallery called A Way Out of No Way, right? Because that's what we do. It's always 5 steps ahead. So we can be sad, but community also helps that.
Yeah, you mentioning planting reminds me, I was talking to another group of writers at a party one night, and this woman brought up the concept of witness trees. I don't know if you've ever heard of a witness tree, but a witness tree is the oldest tree within a given geographic area, and every county in this country knows where the oldest tree in the county is. So you could go to the office or call the county clerk and find out that tree. And I was thinking one day, because I also worry about who am I leaving out of the story, it's not a part of my racial ethnic group, like, because I always want to hold space for Native Americans before I jump into, you know, this story. And I'm like, long after I'm gone, there will be this tree that has been there the entire time, and it will have witnessed everything.
Mm-hmm. And because we're talking about publishing, I think we should, for a minute, address what one colleague of mine calls smart black power. Yes. So there are people within these institutions who aren't known to the public who actually practice smart black power by acquiring, editing, and publishing the books that we write. Mm-hmm. And the battles that they fight on the inside are ferocious, mm-hmm. heart-rending, and gut-churning. And they do that work. I mean, just one quick example, Lonnae's first book and my last book were edited by the same smart black woman, mm-hmm. who's been inside publishing, just kind of fight. So if I see a list of black books and one of them jumps out and really impresses me, I almost assume that she acquired it, that she edited it, that she published it. And my first few children's books were rejected by everybody, but it was women of color. It was an Asian woman and an African-American woman. They kind of rescued those books from the pile and published them, and they became very successful. If they had not been present fighting those battles on the inside, then those books would not have been published.
I love that you said that because you were one of those people too, as an editor in the book world section of the Washington Post. So you're seeing things that are going to get overlooked, but
So
you
let's
pick 'em
talk
up.
about the industry right fast. What motivates you to keep going when making these books is becoming more difficult? Reader tastes have shifted, attention spans have shortened, and the media landscape for coverage, reviews, and even criticism is non-existent. And I especially want to hear from you, Lonnae and Jabari, since the Washington Post no longer has book coverage, and the New York Times announced this week that it will now create a canon department that's basically going to be a listicle.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I must have missed that one. So the first book got much more coverage than this next book did. And we're off the record, so I don't feel bad saying this, live podcast notwithstanding. So maybe I better rethink that. Let's just say
Podcast.
my book was published by Disney, and they are not currently, Anscape is the imprint, but it's owned by Disney, and they are not currently in the business of leaning into Black history and, culture with a robustness that will startle you. That's not where they're living right now. And so I attribute some of the not getting reviewed, right, of all the things that were going to happen. That was not one that I even considered, but I have to, and that doesn't make me any different from the rest of tons of authors out here. And so what you have to do is you have to just accept, okay, I understand they're making business decisions. I'm making narrative and literary and cultural decisions, and that helps me order what I'm going to do with my time and the way that I lean into talking about my book. It's not something I am, that side of the business is not something that is my wheelhouse. Just being a journalist, you're used to just having some, it just travels the world and makes its way, and that is true. But what is also true is you also have to be an ambassador for your work. Yeah. You have to gain your literacy. You have to find the ways and find the people. And Jabari, you've always been great about both of it. You still have the purity and the prime. You're an artist. You're a writer, but that doesn't mean we have to avoid or consider it a badge of honor that we don't pay attention to the business side, because all that'll do is get you unread.
You have to build community outside of the business as well as within it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because I spent most of my career as deputy editor of Washington Post Book World, identifying Black writers, identifying Black authors, giving them exposure, and that is substantial. But as you say, I would go to book signings like this one, and maybe a fourth of the people had read the book review. The rest of them, something else brought them to the space. Mm-hmm. That will continue to happen. Black people benefit from reviews, but we're not solely dependent upon them. There's always going to be loyal Black readers who show up, who are informed by you, and who inform you. Right? It's a two-way thing, and I think we're dependent upon, but we don't hesitate to recognize that that's the real source of our power, that people read our books and support us.
Publishing has been trying to figure out what sells books, and really it's word of mouth. Tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend.
Yeah.
Do you all feel pressure to write a certain type of book, or that you're pigeonholed into one genre?
Never. I write for me, and I write for my people, and I write because you can't defend it any other way, right? If you're inauthentic, how are you going to get up and talk about it and all of that? I was talking to a young man today, and he was struggling with the business side of it. And for instance, my daughter this morning said, Mommy, she runs my social media. I called earlier, and I found out what my Instagram handle was, so I'm making progress. and she said, you need to do a video on your way there. And I took about 5 takes, and I sent it in to her or whatever. And so what I said to this young man is, that's not my jam, right? That's not what I lean into. That's not what I do. I said, but while it feels uncomfortable or a little awkward, it doesn't feel icky, right? When you're inauthentic, that's when you feel icky. And that's the one you lean away from, not the other thing that's just, okay, this is not mine, but I'll level up and do what I need to do.
I'm reaching the milestone years age-wise, and I just don't feel like I have any other choice but to write what my heart and my head guides me to write. Because if I'm writing in the service of basically white comfort, which I would say I did for a long part of my journalistic career, then I'm doing a disservice to myself and the audience that I serve.
One of the reasons you said white comfort, that's so interesting, because at the Washington Post, and I left the Washington Post as a columnist to go to a black-led newsroom, and for that I am grateful to Disney, ESPN, and Scape, because it allowed me to write in the same voice I think in. And that was the most freeing way to write I had ever experienced.
And I think that's one of the great things about books, that it enables you to do that from the beginning, right? So I always envision it as a conversation with particular kinds of readers who tend to look like the people in this room who look like me, right? And that's sort of part of the equation for me as a writer.
So I think I already know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Do you see your work in the books that you write as activism or part of the resistance movement against this current climate of erasure, whitewashing, and all over cultural genocide?
I'm always just telling stories. And
That feels like a very diplomatic answer.
No, it isn't. It's the only answer I can give, because I understand the tradition that I'm folding into, and I honor it and I uphold it, and I feel an urgency and a mandate, but it's the mandate that I feel that Deborah talked about, to be as accurate, that Jabari always talks about, to be as rigorous, to chi-ha, and I'll let him explain what that is. And I do that in service of the story, right? And I do that to, honor the people who came before me. And so it's very organic. I think if I started out with an agenda, it would look like agenda writing. And I'm not saying that's what that is. Of course, you keep in mind that you're in a historical tradition when you're writing. And that's something good to keep in mind and necessary, right? But you have to find a way to make that in service of the story, because you also write to be read.
Yeah, I always think of when I'm embarking on something as I'm going to be in a state of, again, narrative repair, but also in community care. So the book that I co-wrote with some fellow academics earlier this year, it's more academic. It's not as sexy as this book, but
That's very sexy.
yes, it's very sexy.
Hold it up, yeah.
But I do think that anytime that I show up in a space with my mission and my value system and my lived experience, that it is always an act of course correction and engaging in a counter narrative, because I just think that I'm just going to find things that need to be course corrected, and that I'm going to be able to surface some nuance about not just my community but other communities, because of the special lens that I bring to my work that other people that I'm working with may not necessarily see. So I'm a journalist, and so when I'm doing the journalistic thing, I'm supposed to be like, oh, well, I don't have any opinions, but we know that's not true. And so I'm always calibrating towards a sense of balance and repair and care and nurturing for the people that I'm serving.
Well, I'm fortunate in that almost my entire career in journalism has been opinion journalism. So I've always written from a position of advocacy in the tradition of W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells and John B. Russwurm and people like that. And I also, I take the long view, so I'm not so much obsessed with the current climate, because I think current is redundant. I think it's the climate.
Yeah.
I think as
Right.
long as we've been in this country, the majority of the people in this country have never fully recognized our humanity. I don't think they've ever evolved to a point where that usually when they make concessions, it's out of political expediency, not because of some moral evolution. So I think that our mission and our purpose from those earliest black journalists and writers continues today, and I see myself as part of a continuum, as part of a continuation of a struggle that began as soon as our ancestors set foot on this soil.
You said the climate. It reminds me of that old Palmolive commercial. We're soaking in it,
Right.
right?
So then you mentioned writing in the tradition of W.E.B. Du Bois, who wrote at one point that, all black art should be propaganda for the movement and in service of making sure that we are seen as fully human and fully actualized, and in that vein. You see your work, you say you see your work that way. Yes. What are you working on next to continue into that tradition?
Well, yeah, and in essays like Criteria for Negro Art, Du Bois made that argument. I would add some later philosophers who argue that in terms of like poetry and fiction, for art to succeed as propaganda, it must first succeed as art, right? So we have to have the craft aspect of it. And the work that I continue to do, my next book is a book-length poem. It's one poem, and it's a continuum that kind of explores the role of sound in African American tradition. You know, and not just music, but the way we talk, and the way we laugh, and the way we cry, and all of that. You know, it's like I want to participate in the expansion of the notion of what music is, and it's not just instruments and singing. You know, it's like if you overhear black people on the bus just kind of gossiping and chatting, to me it sounds remarkably beautiful and melodious. And so my challenge as a writer is to try to capture that in language and get it on the page. So I think that's part of that tradition as well.
I love that. Keep adding other words to narrative. So I'm thinking narrative reclamation, narrative correction, narrative, what was it?
Strategy.
Strategy, right? All of it. It all goes together. So thank you for that clarification, because it must first succeed as art. It must first succeed as story.
I would have to say, when Jabari hired me as a contributing writer for the Crisis years ago, and I started writing more earnestly in that tradition, I felt like my writing got smarter.
And more authentic and more, right, because you could take it deeper.
All right, so my final question for the podcast taping is, when you are dead and gone and among the ancestors, what would you like someone to write about the legacy of words and work that you left behind?
Wow.
So you're,
Now, y'all been chatty all day, and now everybody's
Thank you, I'm
stumped.
gone. No, that's too long.
Absolutely not.
you done stumped the panel. What do we want? You know, I don't know. Writer, mother, author. That I used to have on my Twitter bio, when there was such a thing, and Black Twitter was glorious, right?
We've migrated to Threads.
Oh my God. Okay. Really? Yes. I just put on there, I'm trying to cover a lot of ground.
Nice.
Right? And I said, I hope I will have covered a lot of ground. Been a woman of my times, you know, like so many before and so many who will come after. I was about to say.
Deborah Douglas told the truth.
Ooh.
And phenomenal woman, that's me.
Love it.
Amen.
Love it.
I would
Yes,
just I would
yes.
hope that they would say he did his best.
Ashe. So thank you, everyone, for coming. I know we're not done. It's just the end of the taping for the podcast.
Okay.
Officially.
Okay.
Now we got to talk about me.
Yeah.
I'm not joking.
No, we want to make sure. We want to make sure we left some space to talk about your first book, The 7 Daughters of Dupree.
Yes. Thank you.
Is that your first book, or have you done before?
Yes
that?
and no.
Okay.
It's my 8th book, my
Okay.
first big 5
Gotcha.
traditionally published book.
I see. Okay. For those of us who aren't super familiar with it, can you give us a brief synopsis of what it's about and what motivated you to write this particular book in the first place? You can ask her some questions. Right?
Okay, The 7 Daughters of Dupree is the historical fiction novel about the secrets kept between mothers and daughters over the course of 7 generations, and it's told backwards in time from 1995 to 1860. The novel is set in 1995 on the south side of Chicago, which is where I'm from. It starts with 14-year-old Tatiana, who it's her birthday, but before she can go out and celebrate with her mother and her best friend, she has to go down in the basement where her mother runs a hair salon, and there's a client on this Sunday morning. That client is her grandmother, because her grandmother, Mimi, comes over every Sunday morning before what? There we go, to get her hair done. And you would think that in this basement with these 3 generations that Mimi, her real name is Gladys and Nadia, the mother, would be giving Tatiana all of these pearls of wisdom and encouraging her. And that's not happening because they are keeping a secret from her. She wants to know the identity of her father, and Nadia and Gladys refuse to tell her. And so that is the very first secret in this line of Dupree women that goes all the way back to 1860 in the fictional town of Land's End, Alabama, where the first in their line lived. But they don't know anything about this ancestor. They don't know her name or where she was from. They only know the legend of how she died. And the legend is the very first line of the book, not a spoiler, and it says they cut off her head because she ran. I know, very gruesome. And so with that line, you know, we're going to deal with enslavement and Reconstruction and Jim Crow, and they get to Chicago, so we're going to deal with the Great Migration, and we're going to bring it all the way back into the present day at the very end.
So So it has a real epic sweep. I like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I want to commend you on getting Bonnie Turpin to be your narrator for the audiobook version. That is a real sign of quality. But you've talked about the vulnerability of writing this book over multiple generations. So can you tell us a little bit about bringing vulnerability to the page and grappling with it and making it through it, if you feel like you did?
I'm sure I did. I call this book a really pretty coping mechanism. I started the book 7 days before my daughter was born. Don't recommend, very ghetto. And in the midst of writing the book, my marriage fell apart and I'm now divorced. And so the page has always been a safe place for me to play, for me to explore. There are often times that I write something before I will ever say it out loud. And so in everything that was happening in my life at the time, I could just do it. I just had to meet the deadline, do the things, get through, parent, write. I was freelancing at the time, whatever it was. And so writing the novel, the emotions that I was feeling that I was not allowing myself to express in my day-to-day life came out on the page. And so I think that's the level of vulnerability people will see when they meet each of the daughters and read each of their stories and think about, the secrets that are being kept between them and whether or not it's for protection or if they're just trying to, or if it's harmful, things like that.
So what's the origin story or the genesis of the book? With my book, I do 7 generations as well, and I'm just wondering, was there, and I call mine a ghost story, are there ancestral, or did you cut this from whole cloth, or did it?
It came in pieces. And so to your first question about what was the genesis of the novel, like I said, I was indie for several years. And so in 2021, I saw online a contest because, at that point, Black people were still in vogue, about a year after George Floyd. And so publishing, like many corporations, was looking for Black writers. And so Gallery Books had this contest where it was like, write 25 pages, the winner will get a $50,000 manuscript. And myself, pregnant as I was, said, I can write 25 pages. And so I did. And so I started them June 2nd. And I had this story about a mother and a daughter. And the grandmother was in the background, but I thought it was really going to be an entire novel from Tatiana's perspective. And as I started to try to write that for this contest, she became unsustainable because she's 14. She's not doing much. She's going to school. She's coming home. She's running track. She's not doing enough to sustain a whole novel. So I was like, well, let me go and see what your mama doing. She running around with this man, and she don't want to tell you about it. So let's see. And so that's where the second perspective came in. And so then I wrote those scenes and then jumped back into Nadia's perspective where she finally does meet her father and brought it to a resolution. It was in the resolution chapters, which is still part 3 in the novel. There's this big Thanksgiving scene, and families get messy. And the grandmother Gladys says something like, well, what do you think happens to light-skinned women in the South? And I wrote past that line, and I finished my first draft, and I wasn't a finalist for the contest, but I still had a book. Mm-hmm. And I said, wait, hold on now.
Right.
What happened to Gladys? Yes. And so then I had this vision of a woman in this white dress, which is actually the cover of the novel, walking down this dirt road. And I was like, okay, well, that's Gladys, but where is she going? What's going on? And the vision got a little wider, and I saw what was behind her. I said, oh, okay, that's okay. But it still hadn't clicked into place yet. It didn't click into place until I was listening to my friend, y'all friend, Disha Philia, on a podcast talking about writing your best first line. Mm-hmm. And it's a workshop she teaches. So I asked myself, well, what would my best first line be? And that's when the line came to me. They cut off her head because she ran. And immediately that line informed the entire novel. I knew who the ancestor was. I knew what was going to happen to her. I knew why. I knew the historical portions I wanted to bring into it to round out the story. And then I just had to fill it in because I went from 3 to 4 generations, but I knew one was enslaved and the other 3 were contemporary. So who are these other people? And so I just started asking their names. My mind went to church. 7 is a number of completion. And so I was like, okay, we'll do 7 generations and just filling in the blanks and asking them, being a journalist for my characters to get their stories.
You just kept making space.
Mm-hmm. Well, they kind of just came and started talking to me too. They're very loud, very insistent,
Yes.
Rude.
Judgy. Real judgy.
You have these sort of dual.
They're trying to wrap us up. They said we're done.
I am so. I
want
hate
to know
be,
more.
Yeah, I hate to be the bad guy here because I too want to keep listening, but unfortunately we are at the end of the program. So if you can all join me on giving them a wonderful round of applause.